The Gipsy Prophecy by Bram Stoker. "I really think," said the doctor, "that at any rate one of us should go and try whether or not the thing is an imposture." "Good," said Considine. "After dinner we will take our cigars and stroll over to the camp." Accordingly, when the dinner was over and the La Tour finished, Joshua Considine and his friend, Dr. Burleigh, went over to the east side of the moor, where the gipsy encampment lay. As they were leaving, Mary Considine, who had walked as far at the end of the garden where it opened into the laneway, called after her husband: "Mind, Joshua, you are to give them a fair chance, but don't give them any clue to a fortune, and don't you get flirting with any of the gipsy maidens, and take care to keep Gerald out of harm." For answer Considine held up his hand, as if taking a stage oath, and whistled the air of the old song, The Gipsy Countess. Gerald joined in the strain, and then, breaking into merry laughter, the two men passed along the laneway to the common, turning now and then to wave their hands to Mary, who leaned over the gate, in the twilight, looking after them. It was a lovely evening in the summer. The very air was full of rest and quiet happiness, as though an outward type of the peacefulness and joy which made a heaven of the home of the young married folk. Considine's life had not been an eventful one. The only disturbing element which he had ever known was in his wooing of Mary Winston, and the long-continued objection of her ambitious parents, who expected a brilliant match for their only daughter. When Mr. and Mrs. Winston had discovered the attachment of the young barrister, they had tried to keep the young people apart, by sending their daughter away for a long round of visits, having made her promise not to correspond with her lover during her absence. Love, however, had stood the test. Neither absence nor neglect seemed to cool the passion of the young man, and jealousy seemed a thing unknown to his sanguine nature. So, after a long period of waiting, the parents had given in, and the young folk were married. They had been living in the cottage a few months, and were just beginning to feel at home. Gerald Burleigh, Joshua's old college chum, and himself sometime victim of Mary's beauty, had arrived a week before, to stay with them for as long a time as he could tear himself away from his work in London. When her husband had quite disappeared, Mary went into the house and, sitting down at the piano, gave an hour to Mendelssohn. It was but a short walk across the common, and before the cigars required renewing, the two men had reached the gipsy camp. The place was as picturesque as gipsy camps, when in villages and when business is good, usually are. There were some few persons round the fire, investing their money in prophecy, and a large number of others, poorer or more parsimonious, who stayed just outside the bounds, but near enough to see all that went on. As the two gentlemen approached, the villagers, who knew Joshua, made way a little, and a pretty keen-eyed gipsy girl tripped up and asked to tell their fortunes. Joshua held out his hand, but the girl, without seeming to see it, stared at his face in a very odd manner. Gerald nudged him. "You must cross her hand with silver," he said. "It is one of the most important parts of the mystery." Joshua took from his pocket a half-crown and held it out to her, but, without looking at it, she answered: "You have to cross the gipsy's hand with gold." Gerald laughed. "You are at a premium as a subject," he said. Joshua was of the kind of man, the universal kind, who can tolerate being stared at by a pretty girl, so, with some little deliberation, he answered: "All right, here you are, my pretty girl, but you must give me a real good fortune for it," and he handed her a half-sovereign, which she took, saying: "It is not for me to give good fortune or bad, but only to read what the stars have said." She took his right hand and turned it palm upward, but the instant her eyes met it she dropped it as though it had been red-hot, and with a startled look glided swiftly away. Lifting the curtain of the large tent which occupied the centre of the camp, she disappeared within. "Sold again," said the cynical Gerald. Joshua stood a little amazed and not altogether satisfied. They both watched the large tent. In a few moments there emerged from the opening, not the young girl, but a stately-looking woman of middle age and commanding presence. The instant she appeared the whole camp seemed to stand still. The clamour of tongues, the laughter and noise of the work were, for a second or two, arrested, and every man or woman who sat or crouched or lay stood up and faced the imperial-looking gipsy. "The Queen, of course," murmured Gerald. "We are in luck tonight." The gipsy queen threw a searching glance around the camp, and then, without hesitating an instant, came straight over and stood before Joshua. "Hold out your hand," she said in a commanding tone. Again Gerald spoke sotto voce. I have not been spoken to in that way since I was at school. Your hand must be crossed with gold. 100% at this game, whispered Gerald, as Joshua laid another half-sovereign on his upturned palm. The gipsy looked at the hand with knitted brows, then suddenly looking up into his face said, "Have you a strong will? Have you a true heart that can be brave for one you love?" "I hope so, but I am afraid I have not vanity enough to say yes." "Then I will answer for you, for I read resolution in your face, resolution desperate and determined if need be. You have a wife you love?" "Yes," emphatically. "Then leave her at once. Never see her face again. Go from her now, while love is fresh and your heart is free from wicked intent. Go quick, go far, and never see her face again." Joshua drew away his hand quickly and said, "Thank you," stiffly but sarcastically, as he began to move away. "I say," said Gerald, "you're not going like that, old man. No use in being indignant with the stars or their prophet. And, moreover, your sovereign, what of it? At least, hear the matter out." "Silence, ribald!" commanded the Queen. "You know not what you do. Let him go, and go ignorant if he will not be warned." Joshua immediately turned back. "At all events, we will see this thing out," he said. "Now, madam, you have given me advice, but I paid for a fortune." "Be warned," said the gipsy. "The stars have been silent for long. Let the mystery still wrap them round." "My dear madam, I do not get within touch of a mystery every day, and I prefer for my money knowledge rather than ignorance. I can get the latter commodity for nothing when I want any of it." Gerald echoed the sentiment. "As for me, I have a large and unsaleable stock on hand." The gipsy queen eyed the two men sternly, and then said, "As you wish. You have chosen for yourself, and have met warning with scorn, and appeal with levity. On your own heads be the doom." "Amen," said Gerald. With an imperious gesture, the Queen took Joshua's hand again, and began to tell his fortune. "I see here the flowing of blood. It will flow before long. It is running in my sight. It flows through the broken circle of a severed ring." "Go on," said Joshua, smiling. Gerald was silent. "Must I speak plainer?" "Certainly. We commonplace mortals want something definite. The stars are a long way off, and their words get somewhat dulled in the message." The gipsy shuddered, and then spoke impressively. "This is the hand of a murderer, the murderer of his wife." She dropped the hand and turned away. Joshua laughed. "Do you know," said he, "I think if I were you I should prophesy some jurisprudence into my system. For instance, you say, 'This hand is the hand of a murderer.' Well, whatever it may be in the future, or potentially, it is at present not one. You ought to give your prophecy in such terms as 'the hand which will be a murderer's,' or rather, 'the hand of one who will be the murderer of his wife.' The stars are not really good on technical questions." The gipsy made no reply of any kind, but, with drooping head and despondent mien, walked slowly to her tent and, lifting the curtain, disappeared. Without speaking, the two men turned homewards and walked across the moor. Presently, after some little hesitation, Gerald spoke. "Of course, old man, this is all a joke, a ghastly one, but still a joke. But would it not be well to keep it to ourselves?" "How do you mean?" "Well, not tell your wife. It might alarm her." "Alarm her? My dear Gerald, what are you thinking of? Why, she would not be alarmed or afraid of me if all the gipsies that ever didn't come from Bohemia agreed that I was to murder her, or even to have a hard thought of her, whilst so long as she was saying Jack Robinson." Gerald remonstrated. "Old fellow, women are superstitious, far more than we men are. and also they are blessed or cursed with a nervous system to which we are strangers. I see too much of it in my work not to realise it. Take my advice, and do not let her know, or you will frighten her."